I love the zoo, and that's why I'm pleased that it is the subject of this main point question. You will recall an important departure from must be true questions to main point questions is that in main point questions we're not merely looking for what is definitely implied, but also what is the conclusion of the argument. Here's what that means. That of course will require that it be definitely true. So it's the same first step that you had in must be true questions, but we're adding another step. It's not enough that it merely must be true. It rather must be supported by other stuff in the argument. If it is something that merely must be true and is not supported by other stuff in the argument, it could just be a premise. And what they're asking us to do here is to differentiate between merely the premises that have to be true and, of course, the things that are proven to us, and those things are the conclusions. So the first pass through, you're going to eliminate everything that doesn't absolutely need to be true, because that's neither premise nor conclusion. Then what you're going to do is seek to differentiate the things that are merely true because they told you in the stimulus and things that were actually argued for. Now in this particular question, we are doing that with regard to I know you can't tell because these don't look like zoo animals, but with regard to a zoo. You'll note my giraffe looks fine, like the Toys R Us guy. It's supposed to be a lion. It's actually a hamster with a big bib on it and a really bad tail and kind of like Homer Simpson's feet. Let it go. Just let it go, because that's what I do. We are told in the stimulus that the city is in a financial crisis, and what city isn't? And we are also told that they are considering cutting the budget of the zoo. Now, the thing about that is they tell us in the second sentence that that would be what they call false economy. More on that in a second. And they give us some reasons why. One is the zoo doesn't really cost very much, and if they cut the funding, it will be forced to close. Secondly, that it brings tourists and therefore tax dollars to the city. And third, that it adds immeasurably, it says, to the cultural and artistic nature of the community. Now, then they ask you what the main point is. Now, here's the thing. If you can ever read over a stimulus and recognize that there are certain reasons and then a result given, you're going to want to look for the result or what they're trying to prove to you. Another way of actually considering these kind of questions is that there are broadly two kinds of main point questions. Those in which they state the conclusion somewhere in the stimulus, and those in which they don't state it, it's merely implied. Now, I ask you, in this case, did they actually state in the stimulus, in any of those sentences, did they actually say what the conclusion was? Because I think they did. Do you know where they did? Because I think I know. When they say, cutting the money of the zoo would be false economy, it is the false economy that is the conclusion. That's what they're trying to convince you of, that it would be false economy to cut the zoo's budget. Do you know why that's the conclusion? Well, let me give you some reasons. First, zoo doesn't cost very much. Secondly, it actually brings dollars into the city in the form of tourists, and thus it's a money maker. And third, it makes it a more attractive place to move to, thus another way in which it brings money into the city. Thus, if you close the zoo, it's going to be false economy because it makes you more than it costs you. So when we go to the answer choices, I want to be looking for something like closing the zoo would be false economy. And what I want to eliminate are things that are either not necessarily true, those go out immediately, and things that are merely true via stipulation, those being premises. Let's talk about those answer choices now. And answer choice A. We are told in answer choice A that reducing spending is the only means the city has of responding to the current budget crisis. The word only should perk up your ears a little bit. We know that they must reduce spending, but we don't know that that's the only thing that they could do. They might do other things as well in addition to that. Furthermore, that's stated in the first sentence, but they never explain why that's the only way. They simply say it. It's true by stipulation if it's true at all. And I think there's an argument that because of the word only, A doesn't even have to be true. It goes the way of all flesh out immediately. Skipping B for no particular reason, we are down to C. C says that the city zoo's budget is only a very small portion of the city's overall budget. Well, that's true. It's only 1%. But how do I know it's only 1%? What argument did they give me that it's only 1%? And of course, they didn't. It's not even clear how that could be a conclusion. That's absolutely the sort of thing that's just true by stipulation, thus a premise. Because answer choice C is a premise, it is not going to be the conclusion and thus is eliminated. Answer choice D. In D, we're told that the zoo will be forced to close if the budget is cut. Again, I think that does have to be true based on the stimulus. However, why does it have to close just because they cut the budget? There's no donors. There's no other thing they could do. They couldn't ask the animals to chip in. I mean, there's nothing they could do, nothing. And I don't know why, I just know that it must close because They said it. They said it has to close. Again, whenever it's just true because they said it, it's the hallmark of something that's true by stipulation or true just because they said so, otherwise known as a premise. And that takes us to answer choice E. E says that the city's cultural heritage will be irreparably damaged if the zoo is forced to close. Now, I know that it adds immeasurably to the climate, but I don't know if it will be irreparably damaged. That literally means there's nothing you could ever do to repair it. Nothing. Build Knott's Berry Farm? Nothing. You get an entire new Costco? Nothing. You can build a Louvre? Still, nothing will ever replace the zoo, and I think that's a bit strong. I don't even know if that needs to be true, but even if it did need to be true, again, it would just need to be true because that was the third reason they gave you that the zoo shouldn't close. Really, these are all reasons in favor of not closing the zoo. Another way to look at this is that C, D, and E are all reasons why you want to keep the zoo open. Doesn't cost very much, adds a lot to the city, and if you cut the funding, they're going to be forced to close. You know what? Don't close the zoo because it's false economy. That's what you get in answer choice B. It would be false economy to close the zoo. You will note that that very closely matches the second sentence of the stimulus. Now, one last thing about these. When they do state the main point in the stimulus, what's very, very, very common is that they will break up the sentence with subordinate clauses and stuff that'll make it a little harder to read, or they'll put it in the middle of the middle where you're not expecting it. What's unusual is that they'll put it at the end. So the fact that they bury that sentence somewhere in the middle of this whole thing isn't very surprising. B is going to be our answer, and this is a very, very, very paradigmatic and important example of how main point questions work.